And today's gratuitous food shot is Olympics Catering Menchi Katsudon. Okay, so a few days ago I received this little postcard, arigato, and the message is, we would like to express our heartfelt thanks to you for being action of the following I Will Shine, which is the Fieldcast concept and making a great contribution to the success of Tokyo 2020 as a member of Fieldcast. We hereby present this certificate in recognition of your dedication and commitment. So that was nice to receive, although as occurred to me many times over the course of the experience, I kind of wished that the capacity in which they'd hired me was as a proofreader. I fixed it. But yes, it made me remember that I had intended to do a video about my Olympics experience, but then never really got round to it, so here we are. Got dressed up again for the occasion and everything. So yes, even now, a few months after the end of the Tokyo 2020 Olympics in 2021, my feelings about it are still a little bit ambivalent. On one hand, it was probably the most unpopular Olympics with the local people in recent memory, but on the other, I had a pretty amazing time. I didn't have to sacrifice very much, and yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed myself. So personally, I had always intended to volunteer for these Olympics. I had a really good time in the London 2012 Olympics, which was super close to where I was living at the time. I didn't volunteer there, I actually got a job at that venue. And yes, I just really enjoyed myself, and my local area kind of gained this party feeling, this carnival atmosphere. Because we did the night shift there, I smile when I remember all the mucking about we did actually in the venues themselves. And yeah, I heavily considered going to Brazil because, you know, the one time I've been to Rio de Janeiro, I really enjoyed myself, so I was tempted to go again. That turned out not to be so convenient though, but I thought it didn't matter because, you know, I would volunteer at Tokyo and have another really fun time. But of course, Tokyo 2020 turned out to be quite unlike any other Olympic Games ever, really. Though if you look into some of the first games of the modern Olympics, you realise they really weren't taking it all that seriously back then. But yes, of course, the reason this year's Olympic Games were very different was that the pandemic hit, of course. So the Games were postponed from 2020 to 2021, and I have to say, right up until maybe a month before the Games actually happened and athletes started arriving, I seriously thought they were going to cancel 2021's version of the 2020 Games as well. I just thought it wasn't going to happen. And of course that's where a lot of the ambivalence I talked about has come from. I mean, people really were against the Games happening in the run-up to them, especially the expat community, or at least that's who I was most exposed to online. They said the Games were going to cause massive spikes in the number of coronavirus cases. It was going to be this huge humanitarian disaster where people were trapped in the country and had to be quarantined, and everyone was catching coronavirus because it came from all these foreign countries. And of course, that didn't really happen. Yes, the Games were during a spike in cases, and of course there was a lot of scrutiny on the people who are coming into the country and then breaking the rules of staying in the hotel, and you know, some of the athletes were testing positive and their teams were testing positive. On the scale of a country or even a city like Tokyo, those were really negligible numbers. And if anything, the main problem that the Olympic Games ended up causing, because they were held with no spectators, was that people decided to gather in large numbers outside the stadiums and close to the venues, and obviously that's not ideal when you're trying to prevent the spread of a virus. Sure. So ultimately, since I'd always been looking forward to the Games, and I love fencing, so I really wanted to support the fencing, which is obviously not that popular a sport. So it's not like there's huge amounts of money thrown at fencing. So, you know, the Olympics are very important for these athletes. It's the pinnacle of their careers. So I made the decision that while yes, the IOC certainly seemed to put profit before safety, and it maybe wasn't actually a very good idea to hold the Games, if they went ahead, I was going to support them. I'd only volunteered for about 5 days total anyway, so it wasn't exactly a huge time commitment for me. And yes, I ended up being very glad that I did. So yes, I just want to make it clear that yes, I understood that people were opposed to the Games, and I understood their reasoning for that. It's just that when I saw the measures being taken against the virus at the venues and even during training, it occurred to me that the safest place to be in Tokyo was probably inside those venues. We were having daily PCR tests. I'd never had a PCR test until I started having them every day as an Olympics volunteer. And I've read a lot of people who would struggle in Japan to get tested, even though they would go to doctors presenting with the appropriate symptoms that should have meant they would get a test. They were often told they couldn't have one. So that, combined with the fact that I could actually get vaccinated several weeks earlier than I would have been able to just going through the process as it was set up otherwise. And yeah, obviously I do know that there's a substantial proportion of the population who think that having to receive the vaccine is certainly not a good thing, but I was perfectly happy to receive it. So while there was a lot of flack from people who would laugh and say, you're volunteering your time to work for free for a multi-billion-dollar organization, what are you doing? While I did understand that point of view, well, we were given some expenses, we were given pretty tasty food, and yeah, these uniforms they gave us are pretty high quality as well. Got these Asics for free, I'm wearing these pretty much every day, my regular sneakers, so got free shoes as well. But much more than all of that, it was quite lucky, quite serendipitous, but I had one of the best experiences of my life on one of the days volunteering. So ultimately, compared to what I know people had to do in London as volunteers, because obviously I talked to a lot of them in the venues, we got a really easy ride. Obviously the number of volunteers they had were there to be able to cope with the crowds, and then there were no crowds. So in terms of distributing the labour, there was really not very much that we had to do. Plus, even in my role, I happened to get really lucky because I'd chosen all the afternoon shifts because I'm lazy and don't really want to wake up. But all the hard work happened in the morning. That's when it was hectic because there were a lot of fencing teams, a lot of coaches, all needing to be organised. And by the time I got in, several had been eliminated and left. So yeah, I didn't plan it that way, but I ended up getting a pretty easy job. Plus, of course, most critically, we got to watch some of the games from the front row. And again, by super good luck, I was there on the day that the men's épée team from Japan won the gold medal. So yeah, I arrived after they got through some preliminary rounds. I got to watch them fence in the semi-finals, and then yeah, of course everybody wanted to watch the finals, so we had to kind of divide it. I couldn't watch the first half because my job was looking after the athletes like backstage, but then for the second half the team swapped, so I was there watching as Japan won their gold medal in men's team épée. Now, men's épée is my sport as well, and even better, one of the fencers, his name was Uyama Satoru, he fenced in a way that I'd always wanted to fence. So basically, when I was a moderately competitive fencer, I was an épéiste, and I wanted to have a really quirky style. I like going for hits like here and on the foot and being unpredictable. And, you know, obviously it didn't work to a super high level for me, but there was Uyama-san doing what I had always wanted to do at the very highest level and winning the first gold medal Japan ever won in fencing. And then yeah, the moment they won, it was such a great celebratory feeling. Of course, all the other volunteers were all Japanese nationals. They were jubilant. Afterwards, you could go backstage and talk a little bit with the athletes. It was just such a celebratory party kind of feeling that I really felt like I was lucky to be there. And then some celebrities showed up, some sporting celebrities. There was Ota-san, he won a couple of silver medals for Japan before in foil. And then this guy is Takei So, he's a former decathlete turned talento, like TV celebrity. So yeah, admittedly the other days I was there were more dull than anything else. I was just mostly looking after athletes who could look after themselves just fine. But there was a certain European team who got a bit stroppy that they could only have sandwiches and there wasn't hot food prepared for them at 3 p.m. and they had to wait till 4:30. But yeah, it was a super easy job. I made some good friends. I had my enthusiasm for fencing reignited for at least 1 week. But yeah, I do intend to pick it up again at some point in the near future. And yeah, since it was actually in Makuhari Messe, which is in Chiba, so not really Tokyo Olympics, but you know, the same part of the world as Tokyo Disneyland and Tokyo Airport, Tokyo Narita Airport. So yeah, for me it was easy to get there. You know, I really had to sacrifice very little, and I ended up having a really great experience. Now, this isn't to say that I think this will go down in history as a great Olympics, especially the choice to have a very somber and somewhat confusing opening ceremony is probably not going to endear the event to people in years to come. Although, yeah, I do understand it was, appropriate to not have a great celebratory feeling when there was this terrible event happening all around the world. But yeah, I did hope, Japan would lean in a bit harder into, these are the symbols of Japan, samurai and sumo wrestlers and sushi and, Japan stuff. And absolutely, I think there's a lot more scrutiny on the IOC and people who are higher up in it. And certain things they've been doing in their interactions with China haven't helped recently. So yeah, I don't mean this as a wholehearted endorsement of what the Olympics stand for. Like, I have always liked the idea of the Olympics, at least as they were originally conceived as the modern Olympics. I do think it's wonderful having all these countries competing with each other with a feeling of friendliness and solidarity most of the time. But yes, undeniably, profit at the expense of human safety. If you're choosing profit, it's usually not a good look. But this video isn't meant to be so much about that ideological reckoning. It's more about my personal experience and why it turned out to be great. I'm not saying every volunteer's experience is going to be great. I'm not saying mine would have been that great if I didn't happen to be there on that day that Japan won a gold medal in my favourite sport. But for me, I got a lot more out of the experience than I put in. I met a lot of great, personable people. And yeah, I even got some shoes. So yeah, overall, that's pretty good. Honestly, this hasn't been a great year, and I'll probably make a video about that, but looking back, I think the Olympics will be a highlight for me. But as I said in the beginning, because of some of the political implications, because of the very specific circumstances, and slightly on the flip side of things, to be perfectly honest, I got really sick of people on social media trying to make out that the Olympics were just this fount of all evil as well. Taking into account the good and the bad, I do think I will look back on the Olympics as really the highlight of this year for me. Okay, and that's all I have to say about that. See you guys again next time. Bye-bye!